Alright guys, I've got a book that I want to talk to you about. Extreme X-Men, God Loves, Man Kills. I should go ahead and tell you, this collects two separate stories. This collects the original God Loves, Man Kills storyline, which you can see there with the original older artwork, and then this collects the newer Extreme X-Men storyline, God Loves, Man Kills 2, which is Extreme X-Men issues 25 through 30. I'm not going to be reviewing the original God Loves, Man Kills. That is its own separate video. I could talk about it probably for 10 minutes. I'm going to be just talking about the Extreme X-Men storyline here. I may compare and contrast a little bit with the original God Loves, Man Kills, but for the most part, I'm going to try to just talk about the new story. Also, if you've been keeping up with these videos, if you've been reading the Extreme X-Men trades in order, you may remember that Volume 3 collects all the way up to Extreme X-Men issue 23, and then Volume 4 is the 6-issue Mechanics miniseries that was completely separate from Extreme X-Men, and then this volume begins with issue 25. It skips 24. That's collected in Volume 6. So if you are reading these books in order, you may be wondering, hey, where did Cannonball come from? Suddenly he's a part of this team in Volume 5. I forgot for a minute what volume I had. Suddenly Cannonball is a member of the team. Where did he come from? He joined the team in between volumes 3 and 5. That's going to be in volume 6. It's really stupid that they did it that way, but, you know, it is what it is. I guess they just felt like that this book would have been way too long if they had put that issue at the beginning of this book, but whatever. Also, when I was reviewing the Mechanics miniseries and the Schism storyline before that, I mentioned that the Mechanics miniseries, there was really no reason to collect that with the Extreme X-Men series. I was saying, you know, you could pretty much go from Volume 3 to Volume 5 and you really didn't need to read the Mechanics storyline. I had forgotten just how important Kitty Pryde is in this storyline. She's basically the main character here. While all the other Extreme X-Men kind of sort of take a back seat to the action, she's kind of at the focus of it all. I had forgotten just how important she is. So I would still say you probably don't need to read Extreme X-Men Mechanics, Volume 4, especially since it's really hard to find, but you probably do need to know kind of roughly the status quo of Kitty Pryde before you start reading this, because if you're just reading the first 3 volumes of Extreme X-Men and then you jump into Volume 5 and suddenly it's like, whoa, Kitty Pryde is talking to a therapist, she's working at a bar, what's going on here? You just need to know that she goes to college in Chicago and that she has a therapist who knows that she's a mutant, etc. And that's basically all there is to it. So having said that, let me get right into the story here. Number one, actually first, let me get right into the artwork. Up until now, in Extreme X-Men, Salvador Larroca has been the artist on the main series. Now, Igor Kordy is the artist. And I've said before, I'm not a huge fan of his artwork. It's better here than it was in New X-Men, but it's still not great. I still don't really care for his artwork, but other people probably like it quite a bit more than I do. Personally, I like Larroca's art better. I still kind of wish that he was doing the series, but you know, you can't expect someone to stay on a series forever. I just wish that someone a little better than Kordy was doing the art, because I'm not really a huge fan of his artwork. Beyond that, this story is probably one of the most coherent of the Extreme X-Men storylines. And I think part of that is that Claremont is kind of doing a second draft of a story that he wrote back in the early 80s, and a story that was basically adapted for X-Men 2. Around this time, X-Men 2 is coming out in theaters, and I really get the feeling that Claremont is trying to play to that. He's saying, okay, that movie is coming out in theaters. Let's say, hypothetically, somebody comes out of that movie and says, I want to read some X-Men comics. Where should I start? So Claremont decides to use William Stryker and Lady Deathstrike, who are both in X-Men 2, and he uses them in God Loves, Man Kills 2. Also, in this story, he creates a relationship between those two. He says that William Stryker's wife, who is now deceased, that she was a tutor for Lady Deathstrike when she was a child. I don't think that relationship was established before this storyline. In fact, I'm pretty sure after the original God Loves, Man Kills that William Stryker wasn't even in the comics at all until the sequel. And of course now, he's seen as a major player by people who don't really read X-Men comics, since he's been in half of the X-Men movies, and also he's been in some of the stuff written by Kyle and Yost after this storyline, and I'll try to talk about that a little later in this video if I can remember it. So this storyline is kind of trying to cater to the people who maybe aren't huge X-Men comic book readers but have come from the movies and are wanting to read this storyline a little bit, but at the same time it also tries to keep the history of Stryker and Lady Deathstrike intact. For the most part, I think it works because both of those characters are pretty minor characters, so there's not a whole lot of history to remove by adding this retcon to it. This story is, like I said, one of the most coherent because basically it is racism is bad. That was the original theme of God Loves, Man Kills. That's the theme of X-Men 2, and that's the theme here. Like X-Men 2, we have two separate sides of this racism thing. You have, in X-Men 2, Magneto saying that humans are bad, and William Stryker who says that mutants are bad. I want to say here, it works a little bit better than it did in the movie, because in the movie, William Stryker hates mutants, but he always hated mutants. When he finds out that his son is a mutant, he instantly says, okay, we have to get rid of this mutant thing. So it doesn't really work in the movie because while he has a reason to hate mutants now because his son helped murder his wife, I don't really think that it worked well in that movie because he always hated mutants. Here, I feel like it works a little better. You've got this artificial intelligence mutant, which is the best way I can describe this guy. He has created this mutant city, this little mutant town, nestled deep inside a mountain where nobody can find it. And basically, he will invite all these mutants to come live in this town, and if these two human parents and their mutant child come to this town, he is using nanites, because he's an artificial intelligence, to possess everybody who comes to the town, and if you're a mutant, then the nanites will keep you alive, and if you're a human, they will kill you. And this artificial intelligence actually doesn't understand that what he's doing is wrong. When Kitty Pryde is talking to William Stryker at one point in this story, the artificial intelligence says, why are you talking to it? It doesn't have a soul. It actually doesn't understand that human beings are life forms. It doesn't understand that it's committing atrocities here. Meanwhile, on the other end, you have William Stryker, who wants to kill all mutants, and he is trying to, and I feel like it works better here. Now, it still doesn't work 100% good because the artificial intelligence doesn't fully realize that it's committing atrocities. But my one problem with this story, in fact, the biggest problem I have with this story, is that William Stryker, he is fully 100% dedicated to his cause. He is not the kind of guy who is going to very easily decide that he was wrong. In this story, he is fully dedicated to his cause until the last issue, and suddenly he says, you know what, all that this guy needs, all that this artificial intelligence needs, is for someone to teach him that what he's doing is wrong. Teach him the ways of the world. And I am that person. I am going to stay here, I'm going to let the artificial intelligence possess me, and I'm going to stay trapped under this mountain, and then I won't be able to get out, I won't be able to infect the rest of the world with the nanites, and then I'm going to stay here and train him and teach him and try and help him learn that all life is sacred. This is a huge problem because it does not feel earned at all. In the very previous issue, William Stryker tries to murder Kitty Pryde, and then he turns around and says that he wants to sacrifice his life for all mutants and humans. No, absolutely not. This is a character arc that does not work at all. It just comes completely out of nowhere. This is absolutely the worst villain turns into a hero story I've ever seen in my entire life. It could have been any other bad guy in the universe, and it would have made more sense. It could have been Skeletor himself, and I think it would have made more sense. This story really falls apart because of that character arc that just doesn't work. It doesn't feel like it's been built to at all. Beyond that, I don't have a whole heck of a lot to say here. Wolverine is still in the story, even though in the Schism storyline, the only reason he was hanging around with the X-Treme X-Men was because Storm was injured, and he wanted to stay around and make sure that she got better. By this point, she's completely recovered, but Wolverine is still hanging out with the team. And the real reason for that is because Chris Claremont got rid of like 80% of the X-Treme X-Men. He got rid of Thunderbird, he got rid of Lifeguard, he got rid of Slipstream, he got rid of Psylocke, he got rid of Beast. Some of these characters he didn't want to get rid of, like Beast. He got rid of Rogue and Gambit. He got rid of like 8 characters who are in this team, and so now it's basically Storm, Sage, and Bishop. And so he's keeping Wolverine around because he needs characters on this team, and then he has Kitty Pryde, who's kind of sort of part of the team in this book, but like I said last volume in my review of Mechanics, she does not want to be a superhero anymore, and at the very end of this book, she tells Storm and Wolverine that she wants to be a politician now. And of course that's a subplot that was picked up in, or it was part of X-Men The End, which I think came out before this volume, but outside of X-Men The End, which the less said about that story the better, I don't think it's ever revealed that Kitty ever actually became a politician, because after X-Treme X-Men was over, Joss Whedon wanted to use Kitty in his X-Men run, and so he basically ignored all of that stuff about Kitty Pryde wanting to build a life for herself outside of the mansion, and then from that point on, Kitty has pretty much been a member of the X-Men up until the present day, where she's still a member of the X-Men. So all of that about Kitty wanting to become a politician, in a way, it's kind of similar to how Chris Claremont wanted Cyclops to basically retire from the X-Men in the early 80s and build a life for himself outside of the X-Men with a wife and a kid, and all of that didn't really work for him because editorial wanted to keep using the character, and they wanted to turn his wife evil and stuff like that. And so basically he had these plans that then other people kind of took and ran with in a very different direction. Same thing's happening here. I'm not here to say that that's good or bad. Kitty Pryde is a corporate-owned character, so naturally Chris Claremont doesn't have the right to say, I am the only person who can control what happens to Kitty Pryde. Once he leaves Extreme X-Men, anyone else can do anything they want with her. It just depends on how well those stories work is the whole thing. Overall, what do I think of the God Loves, Man Kills sequel? I don't really like it, mostly because of William Stryker's character turn that just does not work. Also, William Stryker it's very much presented like this is the end of that character. Like, we're not going to see him ever again in this story. But then, just a few years later, in Chris Kyle and Craig Kyle and Chris Yost's new X-Men series, William Stryker is like the big bad of that run, and they act like this story didn't even happen. In fact, they act like none of the stories with William Stryker happened because he's not even a prisoner in those new X-Men stories. They're acting like he didn't even try to commit genocide in the original God Loves, Man Kills. So that's a weird thing, and I'll probably talk about that much further down the line whenever I get to reviewing the new X-Men stuff and the X-Force stuff by those guys. But if you were curious about how this fits in with Stryker's appearances in new X-Men, it doesn't at all. Those appearances completely contradict the God Loves, Man Kills stuff, or at least the sequel anyway. So I don't really like this story, but it is easier to understand than some of the stuff that came before, like the Destiny storyline, and it works a little better than the Invasion storyline, and even the Schism storyline. It's just not handled very well, but it is easier to understand. So that's all I had to say about this volume, God Loves, Man Kills Part 2. I hope that you guys liked this review. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I will be back next week with another X-Men review. And then I've got some other videos that I'll be doing throughout the rest of this week. So I will see you guys then. Have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.